or twice a week,
Yeah,
so
true,
that's
right.
kind of fine. And I actually think it's quite good for you, you know, to have a bit of a break.
What about you, Chris?
3 years ago, I turned pescatarian. Well, I used to eat a bit of fish, but no meat, and I really religiously stuck to that, but purely through greenhouse gas emissions. And I love meat. I love red meat. Absolutely adore it.
So do you miss it?
But I'm probably more flexitarian now. I eat a little bit of meat, no red meat to speak of at all. I quickly lost the ability to eat it, actually. And
How
red meat really sort of stunk, and I found it really quite difficult. And that really surprised me. I am certainly not a proselyte of saying that we all have to become vegans or vegetarians. I'm just a bit like Tess. Let's just try and eat a little less red meat.
So this seems to me, because we get these stories, it seems to be sort of consumer-driven, this, as opposed to any sort of top-down messaging or that sort of thing. People are just, not that they're going off meat, but they're actually enjoying some pretty stylish vegetarian options, of which there are quite a few. When you go into a nice eatery these days, there are some pretty cool options, aren't there? Maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, and I think as well, like, it challenges you to be a bit more creative in your cooking at home. And you know, like, this is extremely middle class of me, but I love Ottolenghi, and I got his new cookbook.
Oh, God.
I got his new cookbook for my birthday. Yeah,
why don't you be original? Why him?
Oh, because he's a genius. He's a food genius. I mean, his cooking is amazing, and I got Simple for my birthday, and it's not specifically a vegetarian cookbook, but actually a vast majority of the recipes are vegetarian. And I think that kind of vegetarianism by stealth, you know, like not announcing that it's vegetarian because some people have a funny idea about that or whatever, but going somewhere and, all of these things don't have meat in them. You know, I think that is really common now in a way that it never used to be, and I think that's cool.
You don't have Yotam Ottolenghi's book as well, do you?
No, I've never heard of him. But you shouldn't...
I've got three,
Tess,
so
you shouldn't apologise for being middle class. I mean, this is RNZ. We're the epitome of middle class here.
Okay, Chris,
settle easy. I do enjoy sort of variety now, which I didn't. I was brought up meat and 3 veg. In fact, I always used to joke that my mother thought the food was the enemy. She cooked it so much, and the only thing I realised that was steak before I was about 30 years of age. I thought you could eat a nice steak, because peppered steak done to charcoal was never particularly appetising.
Well, it was. I mean, I'm just recalling my own sort of childhood, and we ate well. Mum was a fantastic cook, but it was around meat, wasn't it? It was.
Meal wasn't complete without a side of meat.
So what did we have? We had corned beef. We had a lot of tongue.
Corned beef. Tongue. I had tongue too. We grew up in the same house, didn't we? Mashed potatoes, mashed carrot and parsnip.
You got it.
Peas, beans,
you got
all
it.
boiled till there was no nutrition in them whatsoever. Cabbage, boiled cabbage.
And then once a month you have your big Sunday roast, where the potatoes would be absolutely delicious, but very meaty.
Cooked in lard.
Yeah, well, one thing I did think about I went to South America and Central America, and one thing I thought a lot about was how, you know, in Peru and Mexico, like, they still eat liver and tongue and brain and all the parts of the animal, and that just completely disgusted me, and that made me think we're so divorced from what we're eating, and that's a bit of a problem.
Eat more nose to tail if you are going to eat meat, eh?
Yeah, like,
very
respect
good.
the animal.
And just in 10 seconds' time, what's the favourite recipe from Yotam Ottolenghi?
Cold lemon yogurt and a hot kind of like charred tomato, cherry tomatoes with oregano and thyme and lemon peel.
That's enough, you can just tweet it. Meanwhile, you forgot jelly beans, says someone. Tess Nichol and Chris Gallivan, thank you very much for being with us on the panel.
Thanks, team. Great to be here.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, dirty surgical instruments are accidentally used on patients, including 3 children. The Hawke's Bay health bosses say 55 of them are at risk of infection, but it will be 6 months before they know if they're in the clear. How did it happen? The DHB is live. At Malcolm Rewa's murder trial, we go inside the bloody crime scene where Susan Burdett's body was found in 1992. From 16 into 1, a massive shake-up looms for our Polytechs, and asbestos contamination forces Hastings families out of their homes. And the Mexican drug lord El Chapo is going to jail, probably forever. Time now for the news.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. The Health Minister says it's too early to talk about compensation for patients treated in Hawke's Bay using unsterilised equipment. Children and the elderly are among 55 patients who are now being tested for HIV and hepatitis after 91 pieces of surgical equipment were found to have not gone through the final stage of sterilisation. Half of the equipment was recalled before it was used. The Minister, David Clark, says people may be feeling anxious.
My sympathies are with those people who are facing anxiety and not knowing. It's a small-ish number, but this kind of thing shouldn't happen. But I'm pleased that the DHB itself has taken responsibility for what's happened and are determined to follow up with a proper investigation.
David Clark, Hawke's Bay DHB, says it will take some weeks to find out how the sterilisation failure occurred. The Prime Minister has spent the first question time of the year defending her government's relationship with China. The opposition leader, Simon Bridges, is claiming 5 government ministers are seeking visits to China but having difficulty nailing down an invite. It comes as Ms Ardern awaits confirmation about her own visit, which was postponed last year. She says strong relationships don't come without challenges.
Our economic relationship is both incredibly important to us, but also very strong. That is not mutually exclusive from us having challenges from time to time, and that so is the case with the likes of, for instance, our relationship with Australia.
Jacinda Ardern. 6 government ministers travelled to China last year, including the Deputy Prime Minister and the Ministers of Trade, Climate Change, Education, Forestry and Energy and Resources. The government says it will continue putting New Zealand security before Huawei's commercial interests. The Chinese company has gone on the offensive, taking out ads in the New Zealand Herald and on Stuff. The headline reads, 5G without Huawei is like rugby without New Zealand. The government has rejected Huawei's bid to roll out Spark's 5G network, citing significant network security risks. The Minister for the Government Communications Security Bureau, Andrew Little, says the company is using ads to advance its interests.
They are pushing their commercial interests. That's all it is. In the end, the TICSA legislation under which this decision is being made is about our national security interests. We have to safeguard our national security interests, and that's the one thing the government has to focus on.
Andrew Little. Huawei says there is no evidence that it has done anything wrong. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says merging the 16 polytechnics into one will put an end to cutbacks and deficits that have dogged the sector. Mr Hipkins today announced a proposal to create the New Zealand Institute of Skills and Technology. He says polytechnics have been struggling for too long.
There have been something like 50 or 60 restructures of staff in our polytechs around the country in recent years. That's clearly unsustainable. We can't keep simply restructuring the status quo. So this is the circuit breaker that I think people are looking for. It will provide stability and certainty into the future, and it will give us an opportunity to do a much better job of delivering the skills that our regions need and that employers are crying out for.
Chris Hipkins says the proposal will cost jobs, but cuts will happen even if the government does nothing. The lawyer for a top Northland police officer on trial for sexual assault has questioned his accuser why she didn't turn him away when he showed up at her house uninvited. Detective Inspector Kevin Burke is on trial at the High Court in Auckland on 2 charges of indecently assaulting a woman over 16 and 2 of unlawful sexual connection. The complainant said she met with Mr Burke in 2002 to discuss her worries about a man's fraudulent behaviour. She claims that he later showed up to her house unannounced and drinking beer. The woman said Mr Burke then sexually assaulted her. But under cross-examination today, defence lawyer Arthur Fairley put it to her that what happened was consensual and she was the one to invite Mr Burke over. When Mr Fairley asked the complainant why she didn't tell Mr Burke to leave, she replied that he was a police officer and she trusted the authorities. A dust haze is shrouding Sydney and parts of New South Wales, making air quality hazardous, and there are predictions it could eventually reach New Zealand. The dust has been picked up from the state's west and has been blown to the coast by strong west to northwesterly winds. Satellite photos show the 2,000-kilometre dust band stretching from the Queensland border across into the Tasman Sea. Weather zone meteorologist Brett Dusk has told the Sydney Morning Herald there's a chance the dust cloud could reach the South Island tonight, but it would be greatly reduced. It's 5 minutes past 5. On to sport now. The Black Caps bowlers have ripped through Bangladesh's batting lineup to have the tourists 179 for 7 after 39 overs in the opening one-day cricket international in Napier. Bangladesh won the toss and opted to bat, but have consistently lost wickets through their innings. Matt Henry, Trent Boult and Mitchell Santner have taken 2 wickets each, while Lockie Ferguson has also picked up 1. New Zealand golfer Lydia Ko is confident she can replicate her 2015 win at this year's Australian Open, which starts in Adelaide tomorrow. The former world number 1 will start the tournament ranked 14th, though 2018 wasn't a bad year for the 21-year-old who snapped a winless streak with victory in the LPGA event in Florida in April. She says taking up yoga has helped her mental strength and focus, but unlike other seasons, she's kept the same coach and gear, meaning a minimum of changes.
I've still got the same name, same caddy. No, I haven't really changed much over this off-season, but all of the changes that I had made, I felt like, I had no regrets in making, and, it takes time to get used to things, and, winning the Medio Championship last year in April gave me a lot of confidence.
Lydia Ko there. The English football side Manchester United have finally suffered their first loss under caretaker manager Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. United have been beaten 2-0 by Paris Saint-Germain in the first leg of their Champions League round of 16 tie at Old Trafford. That's the news.
This is unacceptable. I did not sign up for this. When I prayed during the winter months, I asked the Lord to make it warm. I did not say, Lord, please bring the devil from hell and have him sit his ass crack on earth. That's not what I asked for.
Nights with Brian Crump. After the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Med-Service through to midnight. Tomorrow, Thursday, in the west from Auckland to Wellington, fine apart from areas of cloud morning and night. For the rest of the North Island, also Nelson, mostly sunny. Bulla and Westland, fine for the rest of today. Drizzle developing tomorrow morning, then rain spreading northwards from tomorrow afternoon. Heavy in southern Westland. For Fiordland, often cloudy, a few showers in the west. Rain with heavy falls for a time overnight through to tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine. Low cloud about the coast at times. High cloud increasing tomorrow, then late showers for Canterbury. Otago and Southland, fine with increasing high cloud today. Low cloud about the east coast at times. A period of rain tomorrow morning or afternoon, followed by isolated showers. And for the Chatham Islands, low cloud, occasional drizzle clearing tomorrow morning. Just after 8 minutes past 5.
You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Health authorities are investigating how unsterilised surgical instruments may have been used on 55 patients in the Hawke's Bay, exposing them to potentially deadly diseases. The patients, who include 3 children under the age of 16, will now be tested for HIV, hepatitis B and C, after a theatre nurse on Monday found a batch of equipment hadn't gone through the final sterilisation process. It will take up to 6 months for patients to find out if they're in the clear. The DHB says 18 patients who had operations at Hawke's Bay Hospital in Hastings are affected, as well as up to 37 others who attended dental or gynecological clinics between the 2nd and 11th of February. It is now investigating how the failure occurred. Dr. Colin Hutchison from the Hawke's Bay DHB is on the line from Hastings now. Doctor, can you tell us, you've said that the risk of infection is low, so statistically how low?
Yeah, it's impossible to put a statistical number on it, but the reason we have a multi-step process is for events such as this. And the 2 stages of cleaning that these instruments went through already, it's highly, highly likely to reduce any chance of passing on any viruses to patients.
If you don't know the numbers, how can you classify the risk as low?
The experts both here within Hawke's Bay and nationally have said it's impossible to put a number or a percentage on the risk. The first thing to do is just to state that the fact that actually the chances of these instruments being used on a patient with a infection before the sterilisation process is extremely remote in itself. And that is the first thing that makes the chances of any of these patients being an actual risk very, very remote.
So given that you're saying that there's a low likelihood of infection, and you mentioned at the press conference that this could cause patients some high levels of stress, what thought did you give to not telling them about this?
Well, so we again took advice from our colleagues nationally about this, and it was down the straight basis that because we can't exclude any risk, we have to be, as an organisation, open and transparent, and we need to inform the patients we care for the mistakes that we've made and give them an opportunity to go through a care pathway that ensures that we're protecting them as best as we can.
But you did consider keeping the information from them?
No, we've just weighed up the risk versus benefit of causing unnecessary mental stress. And when we reached the point of that we couldn't exclude any risk to them, there was no thoughts about not disclosing this to the Hawke's Bay population.
So you've got 55 patients, 18 have been identified as having surgery at Hawke's Bay Hospital, and then you've got outpatient or out clinics that equipment went to. Why can you not track down those individual patients?
So in our main theatre block, literally every piece of equipment is tracked to a patient has an operation, and that doesn't work in the context of an outpatient clinic where batches of equipment arrive in the clinic and then are used on a needs basis with a patient. And those different clinical healthcare practitioners aren't necessarily tracking it to an individual patient.
Isn't that a flaw in the system, though? Isn't that a flaw? What happened if something catastrophic happened and you had to track each individual piece of equipment, and in these outpatient clinics you can't? That must be a flaw.
Well, and that's why these events, as awful as they are so important to have those systems learnings from. Because when we've gone out to our outpatient clinics, we've found that actually the dental patients, we can trace to individual patients, but in the gynae clinics, we're not able to do that. And that's where, when we look for the system learnings from these events, the systems do change, both within the local DHB, but also national practices change based on these events.
So what, you're saying it's good because you've identified a flaw that you can now fix?
Well, whenever something adverse like this happens, it's really important to learn from it and look for opportunities to do things differently in the future to reduce future patients' risks as well. So
what out clinics did you send this equipment to? Whereabouts?
So they're all Hawke's Bay DHB outpatient clinics.
So what towns or places did you send them to?
So they're within the Hawke's Bay district. So it's our
specifically
doing.
Did any go to Wairoa? What other places did they go to?
Well, so I can't give the names of specific clinics for patient confidentiality.
I'm not asking you for patient names. I'm asking you for geographical areas, specific locations that you sent them.
The way that I'll answer that question is that we do have outpatient clinics in Central Hawke's Bay, in Napier and in Wairoa. And that's as much information as I can give tonight on that question.
And did instruments go to those 3 locations that you've just named?
I can't disclose that tonight.
Why not? It's not identifying any patients. You said you're going to be transparent. Did you send them to those 3 locations?
Well, I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly what equipment went to which places, but what I can do is just reassure you that we've worked with all the clinics that our equipment has gone to, and we've ensured that those clinics have had all equipment recalled, and that where patients have been exposed to equipment that may not have been sterilised, they've been traced and identified.
So sterilisation is a multi-step process. It is the 3rd step that has been missed in this case. In simple terms, what is that step?
So that's the sterilisation process that uses a steaming process, and that process is a very robust final step to firstly disinfection stage, which is a very robust cleaning mechanism. All the equipment's then dried in a very hot dryer, and that drying process kills the majority of bacteria and viruses as well.
So these 91 instruments didn't go through that step. So was that a human error or is it an equipment failure?
So all of these things have multiple layers of safety checks, so undoubtedly there was human errors involved along the way, but this is a system failure that's allowed this to happen more than it being one person's responsibility. I'm
interested that a nurse discovered this, right? A theatre nurse discovered. What was the giveaway? I understand it's the label. The label should change colour when that final stage of sterilisation is done. And this nurse noticed that the colour change had not happened on the equipment, is that right? On the label?
That's correct. So the nurse that opens the theatre package is the final safety check before the equipment's used on a patient, and she noticed when she was using or going to use one of our big equipment bundles from that group that the equipment wasn't sterilised.
Okay, so
what happens?
Here's the thing,
on those
Doctor.
packages is they go from green to black, and that's why it's very obvious.
Green to black. Okay, here's the thing. These pieces of equipment were used in 55 cases. So why didn't the final stage, why didn't the final stage check get done in all those other cases? Why wasn't it picked up earlier?
So the big difference between the earlier ones and this one was that this was a large package with very highly visible markers that change. All the earlier cases were small packages where the markers weren't as clear. But at this stage, I'll be second-guessing of why those weren't picked up. They should be.
Okay, so now we've identified two flaws in the system. You cannot track individual pieces of equipment and their use on patients in our clinics, and you are telling me that labels on some of the equipment do not make it clear whether they have gone through the final sterilisation process. Correct?
So this is all what's going to be reviewed in our event review process, and I don't want to be second-guessing of where this has gone wrong.
No, but those are two weak points that we have just discussed.
Absolutely.
That's two.
There are two points that are already obvious to the group.
What other ones have you identified?
Well, we also just have to look at the mechanisms by which, as equipment's coming out the steriliser, why it wasn't obvious to the staff member removing the equipment, and that hadn't been through a full sterilisation process.
So can I just go back? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can I just go back to the theatre nurses opening the equipment there and checking the labels? Does this not clearly suggest to you that those theatre nurses doing the final checks have not been doing them adequately?
Well, that's exactly what our event review would need to review of how this has occurred.
It seems pretty obvious, doesn't it?
I can't comment on that at this stage.
So why wouldn't they have noticed if they did the check and they checked the colour of the label and it had not turned to black? Why would they not notice that?
So in the smaller packages, the change in the colour isn't from green to black. It's a softer change in colour, and we will need to do a review both here within Hawke's Bay and nationally to see if there's anything else we can do to make that more visible to the staff opening these smaller packages.
OK, so Kevin Snee at the press conference said in the system there's always a number of fail-safe checks. So we've just identified 2 or 3 that have failed. How many others failed?
At this stage, we don't know.
How do you think that looks?
Yeah, well, look, I think this is where, as an organisation, we are being open and transparent. We've reached out to the patients as soon as we recognise there is a problem, and we're doing a rapid review process to ensure this doesn't happen again.
How can we possibly have any confidence?
Well, by the number of steps that are in process. So the first step is around the machine itself and the staff being made aware that we've had an issue with equipment coming out of the machine non-sterilised, and just creating visibility of this, rechecking.
But this short conversation that we have had has shown that your system has failed at multiple points and multiple times.
Yeah. And the only way an event like this occurs is if you have had a system failure at multiple different stages. Because the purpose of having these robust mechanisms in place across a number of areas as safety checks is to avoid this happening. And this is why these events are so rare. And what we've had a number of fail-safes fail and just align in the wrong way.
OK, thanks for joining us this evening. That is Dr Colin Hutchison, who's with the Hawke's Bay DHB. New Zealand's 16 polytechnics could be rolled into a single national institute as early as the start of next year. But nobody knows how much it will cost or how many jobs will be lost in the process. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, unveiled the proposal today, saying polytechnics have been struggling and the merger will put an end to the deficits and cutbacks that are dogging the institutions. The Union for Polytech Staff is giving the plan the thumbs up, but industry training organisations are unhappy they will lose responsibility for 140,000 work-based trainees and apprentices. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
The government says it's a sector in crisis. 3 of them needed almost $100 million in bailouts last year after falling enrolments and financial losses. Now the Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says the answer is a mass merger. 16 technical institutes rolled into the New Zealand Institute of Skills and Technology.
There have been something like 50 or 60 restructures of staff in our polytechs around the country in recent years. That's clearly unsustainable. We can't keep simply restructuring the status quo. So this is the circuit breaker that I think people are looking for. It will provide stability and certainty into the future, and it will give us an opportunity to do a much better job of delivering the skills that our regions need and that employers are crying out for.
Chris Hipkins says the proposal will create efficiencies and save money. And he says the feared job losses will happen either way.
If we don't make change, we're going to see that provision continuing to retrench. We're going to see fewer courses in the regions. We're going to see campus closures. We're going to see more staff layoffs if we don't make a change. So we're going to make that change, and we're proposing to make that change so that we can put the whole system on a much more stable footing.
Part of the plan is stripping responsibility for on-the-job training and apprenticeships from industry training organisations and giving it to the new National Polytechnic. Josh Williams from the Industry Training Federation says vocational training can be improved, but he's puzzled why the ITOs are being dismantled.
We don't see you need to dismantle the current highly well-functioning apparatus of the industry training organisations to do that, and we think there are real risks in centralising the ownership of the industry-owned training system into government, and we definitely want to talk to our industry associations about whether that would be their preference.
Despite the threat of job losses, Michael Gilchrist from the Tertiary Education Union says the plan looks good. He says the union's members want to end wasteful competition between institutions, and a big merger is one way of doing that.
We have been asking for a nationally coordinated system. The current model of competing autonomous institutions who are competing for funding, and that of course translates into competing for students and competing for high-value courses where they can make profits. That system isn't working.
Consultation on the proposals closes on March the 27th. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
It is 21 after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We asked the Polytechnic bosses what they think of the government's plan, but they were locked in meetings today and have not provided us with any comment. If you'd like to let us know what you think on that story, you can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or do email us, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We'd like to hear your thoughts on any of the things that we're discussing this evening. The jury in Malcolm Rewa's third murder trial has been shown a police video taken at the scene of Susan Burdett's killing. The serial rapist denies murdering Ms Burdett, who was found clubbed to death in her Papatoetoe home nearly 27 years ago. Instead, his lawyer accuses Ms Burdett's son of killing his mother to get his inheritance. Annika Smith filed this report from the High Court in Auckland.
In a sometimes shaky handheld police video, the jurors got a glimpse of what Susan Burdett's property looked like in 1992. A large hedge curves around the house as police tape flutters in the breeze. Inside the house, her body is captured on a blood-stained bed in her bedroom. Ms Burdett is naked from the waist down with her legs crossed, and a bra covers her eyes. A purple crochet blanket is placed over her chest, and a wooden baseball bat lies next to her. The blood-soaked scene is a stark difference to an otherwise immaculate house. Neil Grimstone, a former detective who was in charge of the scene, told the court it was unusual.
This was quite different to anything that I had encountered before. It just was very orderly. The whole house was tidy.
Neil Grimstone said police examined the house for 5 days. Each surface was carefully dusted for fingerprints, but those found belonged to people who had legal access to the house, and none were Rewa's. This came into contention when Mr Grimstone was questioned by Rewa's lawyer, Paul Chambers. When examining the crime scene in 1992, the police officer had noted Susan Burdett's bedroom window was dusty and appeared undisturbed. Mr Chambers put to Mr Grimstone that the killer's only point of entry and exit was the front door.
Very difficult for anyone to enter and exit without leaving a trace.
Skilled burglar, perhaps.
It's not in your report, though. Your report specifically notes how difficult it would be for someone to enter and exit that window.
Ask me for my opinion.
Why isn't that opinion in your report?
Neil Grimstone said he believed the front door had been used to exit the house, suggesting the person responsible had climbed through the window. Yesterday, the jury heard Irewa gained silent entry to a number of homes between 1987 and 1996 to sexually attack women. It's the Crown's case that features seen in his serial offending are reflected in Susan Burdett's killing. Irewa has already been convicted of raping Ms. Burdett. His DNA was found inside her body when she died, but it wasn't until 4 years later that it was identified as his. The trial before Justice Venning and a jury continues. Atuiti ko te mātua ko Annika Smith aho.
2 Hastings families forced out of their homes are frustrated they still don't know when they'll be able to return 3 weeks after they had to leave due to asbestos contamination. Anthony Manley and his family were told to pack their bags and get out after WorkSafe issued a prohibition notice on his rental property after testing identified asbestos there. He says that was the day after a contractor hired by his landlord for a paint job water blasted the roof. His family of 5 have been in limbo ever since, and the contamination has forced out others in the neighbourhood too. The real barrier between the Manleys and their home is far more subtle than the monstrous fence around it. Tiny but toxic asbestos particles.
Makes you want to cry.
Beyond the safety fence and the warning sign, there's not a blade of exposed grass at the house the Manleys rent with their young children. The lawn is essentially cling-wrapped in a black polythene to stop the layer of asbestos dust, the contamination, wafting even further.
More than a bomb site. Worse than a bomb site. If you can just look behind me, the whole was completely covered with paint, dust. There was just water everywhere. It was everywhere, all around the section, all on the kids' equipment, just completely covered.
The trouble started just over 3 weeks ago. Anthony says a contractor turned up to paint the roof, knowing full well it could contain asbestos.
My wife actually went out there and asked him, is it safe? Is it going to be okay with my kids running around and playing? He said, that's perfectly fine. Everything's fine. He's not cutting into it. But blow me days, he's water blasting it.
Next minute, WorkSafe shuts down the site after a complaint and positive asbestos tests.
The testers came through and it's actually in the roof cavity itself. All the carpet has to be taken up, all our beddings has to be done, everything inside is contaminated. We can only keep the hard surface stuff, but everything else has to go.
Everything else has to go?
The kids' teddy bears, their favourite teddy bear, we might be able to keep 1 or 2. But we just had to wash it down thoroughly.
And yet more bad news, the order to vacate immediately.
Kitty. Jeffrey.
Those with more lives to spare had to be left behind. Anthony comes by daily to feed the cats. The family was in a hotel for 2 weeks at their landlord's expense. It's book a batch now and another house from Friday. It's stressful, especially for the kids, including the Manley's 10-year-old son, who has severe behavioural problems.
His anxiety levels is going through the roof. This is not good for him. I've got a 4-year-old daughter. She nearly made me cry yesterday when she said, Daddy, I want to go home. For a 4-year-old girl to say, Daddy, I want to go home, that's really heartbreaking because you know you've got a home and you can't take your kids there.
Like trouble, asbestos can spread, and it has, over the hedge and fence to Abby Hillman's place, a Housing New Zealand rental. She says Housing New Zealand took 2 days to turn up after she called.
That afternoon she turned up at about 4 o'clock with $200 gift voucher for a Pick and Save and a $200 gift vouchers, and pretty much told me I had to get out of that house today. She couldn't find us any accommodation in Hawke's Bay, so we were given an opportunity of finding somewhere else we'd like to go. And we did say Whakatane because we have family there.
House hopping meant the children missed the first week of school.
It was pretty stressful because, you know, we're a family of 8. We can't just really turn up on someone's doorstep and be like, hey, can you take us in for the weekend? It's like a lot of planning for that.
Abby's pregnant and her son has a serious medical condition affecting his hearing, eyesight and kidneys. She's worried her house isn't safe. Testers were there last week.
I met with the tester who Housing New Zealand have obviously hired to do the testing. And I asked him, I was like, so is this property safe? And he said, no. And I go, well, would you let your family live here? And he said, definitely not.
The testers are back at Abby's again today. The results not yet known. On the other side of the fence, Anthony and his family, well, they're circling.
Curtains haven't been open in 3 weeks. Heaps of rubbish everywhere, all that black polythene. Just looks abandoned.
Future unknown. Checkpoint contacted the contractor, who told us he wouldn't be making any comment. WorkSafe has confirmed that it issued a prohibition notice on the site, stopping any work which can't resume until all asbestos has been removed. And in a statement it says it's working with the local councils and the DHB to ensure the asbestos is properly removed and the property is safe. It says it's completed its initial inquiries but won't be investigating any further. We've also just had a statement from Housing New Zealand, who says that it went to the tenant's property on the 23rd of January. 2 days later, when they received the results of the asbestos testing, they notified the tenants to move out. They said that they helped them with alternative accommodation, which the tenants accepted. They did subsequent testing and still found asbestos on a portion of land. They were told the house was habitable, but out of caution for their tenants' health and safety, they continued to provide alternative accommodation. There's more tests happening today, Housing New Zealand says, and they're following the correct procedure with an asbestos specialist working to remove the danger from the site. And they apologise for any inconvenience caused to the tenants and say they'll have it sorted as soon as possible. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the president of the Sterile Sciences Association talks us through the sterilisation of surgical equipment. And a New York jury finds Mexican drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman is guilty of drug trafficking on a massive scale. We would love your feedback, so don't forget you can text in on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us at Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Paul Brennan with the headlines.
Thank you, Lisa. The head of Hawke's Bay DHB's Provider Services, Colin Hutchison, has told Checkpoint the risk of infection is low for the 55 patients who may have been treated using unsterilised equipment. The group, who include children and the elderly, are being tested for hepatitis and HIV. They may have been exposed to tools that were not fully sterilised after a batch of medical equipment did not get a full cleaning process. The National Party leader says 5 government ministers who want to visit China can't get visas due to the government's cooling relationship with Beijing. Simon Bridges bombarded the Prime Minister with questions about the government's relationship with its major trading partner in Parliament this afternoon. It follows a number of incidents this week, including an Air New Zealand flight being turned around and a joint tourism event here being postponed. Industry training organisations are warning against the government's plans to dismantle the work-based training they oversee. The government wants to transfer work-based training and apprenticeships to polytechnics, which will be merged into one big national institution. The Industry Training Federation says on-the-job training is working well and costs a lot less than the training provided by tertiary institutions. An Invercargill garage has lost its authority to issue warrants of fitness, affecting 3,500 vehicle owners. The Transport Agency has revoked the inspecting authority of mechanic Donald McLean and his garage, the Woffman Limited. It says Mr McLean failed to properly inspect brakes, exhaust systems and rust repairs and let others do inspections using his authority. The agency says it will be contacting 3,500 vehicle owners about the options for a recheck and will give them vouchers for that. With the Tasman forest fires continuing to burn for a 9th day, residents of about 200 rural properties still don't know when they can go home. The emergency services continue to have a heavy presence in the district, and the fire flared up again last night. 150 fire and emergency staff have been tackling hotspots today, and high temperatures are predicted tomorrow, as well as stronger winds on Friday. Those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. Let's turn to business now with Nona Peltier. Hey, Nona. Reserve Bank announcement OCR this afternoon. Nothing changed.
Nothing changed, but certainly there was some change in language, and so the Reserve Bank governor struck a more cautious tone. And so up until the last statement, not the one today, but the one before, he'd been saying that the interest rates could move up or down. And then last statement, he removed the up and down option and sort of suggested it would probably be a more up. Now we find we're back to the up and down language. And so he had a media conference following the release of the OCR, and this is what he had to say.
We expect to keep the OCR at this level throughout 2019 and 2020. And the direction of our next OCR move could be up or down. Employment is near its maximum sustainable level. However, our consumer price inflation, core inflation, remains below the midpoint of our 1 to 3% target range, and that necessitates continued supportive monetary policy. Our trading partner growth is expected to further moderate in 2019, and global commodity prices have already softened. We see that as reducing the tailwind that the New Zealand economic activity has benefited from over recent years. The risk of a sharper downturn in trading partner growth has also heightened over recent months. Despite the weaker global impetus, however, we expect low interest rates and government spending to support a pickup in New Zealand's GDP growth over 2019. Low interest rates and continued employment growth should support household spending and business investment. Government spending on infrastructure and housing also will support domestic demand.
And so that's the Reserve Bank Governor, Adrian Orr, there speaking. Now, interestingly, the market's reaction has been quite remarkable because they had priced in a more the cautious tone and the up and down risk, but he was far more optimistic in his outlook for the local economy. And that saw our Kiwi dollar literally soar. I mean, it moved, well, I guess a cent against the US dollar today, this afternoon.
It's interesting the time frame he said there, Nona, which is quite long. He's basically saying we're going to sit where we are through 2019 and 2020.
Yeah, he's got a comfortable position, of course, at at an interest rate at 1.75%. That he can afford to sit there, and he has room to move down if he needs to. In the meantime, the world, the global stages, I guess people are playing their trade talks, and we're having that in China right now. There's a lot of optimism that that's going to turn out well, that there'll be some kind of a truce between the US and China, and things will return to somewhat normal conditions, and the global risks will ease. There's that on the horizon. That certainly would have been helping the market consider maybe the Kiwi has more upside than we thought. So yeah, moved to 68.5 US cents today. Now, yesterday we were at 67.3, so that just gives you an indication. And we'd been steady there for quite a long time because the market was expecting what the governor said, but then not to suggest that our economy, our local economy, had as much strength as it did. And so we're touching 96 Australian cents. And again, yesterday we were like a whole cent below that, and 53.1 pence. So very strong numbers there on the currency. On the local market, so that's the NZX, top 50 index. We had a very strong day again because the mood has improved in terms of trade talks. We rose more than 0.5% today, 53 points up to 9,333, and that we were seeing that kind of movement in Asia as well. Moving against the trend, though, just because I noticed that you actually spoke about Sky City earlier, their share price dropped about 4%. That was a 16-cent drop to $3.33 and $3.83, and that's because the market really didn't like their result very much at all. They had an outlook for the second half which was tentative, and they suggested that the weakening economy could play into that. So they were cautious as well, except the market didn't like that as much as Mr. Governor Orr's
his announcement.
His was cautious too, but people liked it more than they liked the one from Sky City.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Palcier with our business news, and we will have more on that Sky City story later in the program. The battle to bring the Tasman wildfire under control is entering its 9th night tonight, and residents evacuated from around 200 nearby properties are no closer to knowing when they'll be able to head home. The blaze, which has burned through 2,400 hectares, is now the country's largest wildfire. Those who have been forced to evacuate say they understand the stakes are high, but the uncertainty and disruption to their lives is taking its toll. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person is in the Tasman and filed this report.
Day 9 of the fire and another hectic 24 hours for Susan Kettle.
So we split up today. I went into Nelson and took Maya, our daughter, into Nelson Girls Prep, and Rob had taken Reuben in, and in the meantime he'd gone and checked on the horses and marked out the paddock where they're staying and picked up the dogs that are staying there as well, and then gone out to our property, and in the meantime I'd gone and got some food supplies, and just the day just disappears, you know.
She and her husband Rob are among the roughly 500 residents still out of their homes. They're staying with their children and friends in Richmond, but with animals scattered at different properties across the area and their home offices out of action, it's a stressful time.
Suck it up, buttercup, basically. A good friend of mine who's in the fire service, that's one of her favourite sayings, and I love it, because that's what you have to do at times like that.
There's no timeline for the remaining evacuees to return home. They're allowed back for a couple of hours each day, but Rob doesn't see that becoming permanent anytime soon.
So it doesn't look so bad from where we are in the valley, but you know that you're just a stone's throw away from, you know, where the main damage is.
Hotspots directly across.
You can see hotspots flaring up, fires in the ground.
One of those flare-ups got big overnight. Fire controller Trevor Mitchell says it's a clear reminder of the dangers it presents.
At about midnight last night, we had a breach of our control line near Eves Valley, and the crews had pre-positioned there in the downwind of the fire and dealt with it quite quickly. It jumped across our control line into some forestry cutover. So this is, for us, this is the fire telling us that it's still the boss, it's still ruling us.
Michael Higgins' Wakefield property is just within the cordon. He's keeping a close eye on the flare-ups and says he's better staying elsewhere at the moment.
It's better to stay out until we can go back and actually do everything properly, because the thought of getting out again is quite difficult. And we did get caught out in the first instance because we thought everything was settled, and then the wind came up and changed things.
But he's confident crews will beat the blaze eventually.
I have a strong faith, so I sleep at night. In fact, the only night I haven't slept so well is the thought of talking to you. And because I know during the day I've got to be wide awake and do the right thing. And there's good people out there. And I just know the dozer operators that have been operating around the back. And I know the firemen, and I'm in good hands.
The Tasman area faces a long recovery from the fire. Crews are expected to be on the ground for weeks to come, with drought conditions and no forecast rain making things even more difficult for farmers. A mayoral relief fund has raised $150,000, but so far none of it has been handed out, as the council is still deciding on the criteria for recipients. In Tasman, for Checkpoint, Nita Blake-Person.
Auckland businesses and hotels are feeling the pinch from repeated delays to the opening of New Zealand's largest convention centre. Sky City today announced another 6-month delay to its $700 million convention centre. The reason? Having to remove panels made of the same material that was partly responsible for London's Grenfell Tower fire. Events booked at the new venue for next year would have attracted up to 10,000 delegates. Customers, local businesses won't see for some time, if at all. Amy Williams reports.
The new convention centre has suffered delays and cost overruns. It was originally due to open this month. Now it won't open until the middle of next year. The new venue will be able to host 4,000 people, and some local businesses are struggling with the lack of expected customers. Just down the road from the construction site, beauty salon owner Neil Seck was anticipating more clients from gatherings. He says this is the quietest his business has been in 25 years.
Our customer base is mainly our regular clientele, but at the same time we do have tourists and visitors coming from everywhere, especially conference centre. It does bring a lot of business. I just wish that they hurry up and finish it, and bring a lot more business to the area will be good.
Neighbouring business owner Willie Chandra opened the doors to his bakery last year and is relying on the convention centre to stay afloat.
For the past 6 months, to be honest, we haven't really managed to turn over a profit. We just managed to barely survive. For a small business like us that just started, to survive another month is really long. So it's just disappointing. It's kept being postponed since last year to this year and into next year.
Around 10,000 delegates were expected to attend events next year, which included 4 large medical conferences, the World Library and Information Congress, and an International Food Science Congress. Sky City Chief Executive Graham Stevens says conferences booked for early next year have been cleared, with some moving to other venues. He could not confirm how many events had been cancelled.
Fletcher's need to complete, and then we need a little bit of a buffer just to get used to running the building before we can open to a large conference. So the second half of the year, I say 1 or 2 conferences that we wouldn't want to move and haven't moved. We've had to clear conferences that were booked earlier in the year.
Mr Stevens says Auckland has lacked a major event for some time, and the convention centre delay is having a knock-on effect on hotel room rates. He says new hotels have opened in anticipation of the convention centre opening.
Our new hotel is yet to open, but a lot of others have opened, and there's no doubt part of their feasibility relied on people coming for conventions. And so as a consequence of the delay, at least in part as a consequence of that, you're seeing a slight imbalance of supply and demand in the hotel market.
Auckland Tourism Events and Economic Development is responsible for attracting business events. The agency's Auckland Convention Bureau Manager, Anna Haywood, says the delay is obviously disappointing. She says the agency's working with event organisers to explore alternative venues in Auckland or look to holding the events when the centre opens. Auckland Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive Michael Barnett says it's not a good look for Auckland.
This is an image of a city that's under pressure and then not performing. And we're not completing projects on time. There's the inner city rail. And then, of course, there's the big signal that it's sending to the marketplace, and that's a severe shortage of skills that we have. So all in all, not good imaging for a city that's trying to catch up.
Mr Barnett says Auckland businesses will just have to be patient as they wait for the convention centre to open. In Auckland for Checkpoint, this is Amy Williams.
Returning now to Hawke's Bay and the revelation about the inadequately sterilised surgical equipment. And Sheila Thomas, the president of the Sterile Sciences Association, who works at Hutt Valley DHB, says it's one of the worst things that can happen in a hospital. She and her colleagues are shocked it's happened. Mrs Thomas explains to our producer Bridget Berg that the sterilisation process in hospitals is complex in order to prevent the spread of infection.
Surgical instruments, when used on a patient, come back to our department, and they are obviously covered. They've been inside a human body and contain blood and tissue from a person. Now, obviously, we cannot just wash that instrument and use it for the next patient. What we have to do is to ensure that that blood and tissue has been thoroughly removed. If these instruments sit for more than half an hour, they form a barrier or biofilm in which bacteria grow. And if we leave it too long, we can't get that bacteria thoroughly off. So it's really important to thoroughly clean these instruments, and we do that by a mixture of manual cleaning and automated cleaning. In the automated cleaning, the instruments are washed and rinsed using specific detergents. Some are alkaline-based, some are acid-based. These detergents remove the bacteria, they remove the tissue and anything else that's left on the instruments, and then we thermally disinfect these instruments. So we know they are clean. They're cleaner than clean. The thing we have a saying is that you cannot sterilize anything unless it is clean, because you can take a dirty instrument or an instrument which still has a bit of tissue on it, and you can put it in a sterilizer, but you've still got tissue on it. It may be sterilized tissue, but that tissue or that bacteria can go into the next patient and cause an infection or a reaction. So it's vitally important that the cleaning process is undertaken first, and that is done really well before you put it in the sterilizer.
Are there 3 steps to that sterilisation process?
Yes. The first is the pre-cleaning at the point of use. So, I'd say 4 steps. Pre-cleaning at the point of use. So that's where, when it's just been used on the patient and they're still in theatre, they wipe the instruments down before they send them back to the sterilisation department. They're pre-cleaned again. They may be soaked in an enzymatic detergent to get off bone and tissue, and then they're loaded into our washers, which are, very expensive pieces of equipment, and they're thoroughly washed and disinfected. The next step of the process is called inspection and packing. So what we do is the instruments come out of the washers. They're very, very clean. And each instrument is inspected. It's inspected to make sure it functions correctly, and it's inspected to ensure that there's no foreign material, dirt, tissue, etc., left on that instrument. It's then either packed in a specific sterilisation crate, which is a sealable lid, or it's put into a special sterilisation basket and wrapped in a sterilisation wrap, which is then ready to go into the autoclave, or the steriliser as we call it, and that's where it goes through the process of sterilisation at 134 degrees centigrade for 4 minutes.
Sheila, without prejudging the outcome of an independent investigation that will be no doubt undertaken at Hawke's Bay DHB to determine exactly how that process was compromised.
Yeah.
Does it happen often inside a hospital environment where that process is in fact flawed?
I would like to say that, I can say for mine, and I think they've got the same ones at Hawke's Bay, your autoclaves give an automated printout. Now, part of your process every day is when your autoclave is finished and that printout, you as a technician or the technicians need to look at that printout. They need to understand that printout, and they need to understand that the autoclave has gone through the processes that it should have gone through. That is that it's pulled a vacuum, it's injected steam, it's done this repeatedly, it's reached its 134 degrees, it's maintained that for 4 minutes constantly. And then at the end of it, it will say cycle finished or cycle aborted or whatever. And that technician is bound to read that and sign, yes, the cycle has passed, no, the cycle has failed.
You're telling me there are sufficient checks and balances, redundancy, resilience built into the process?
Yes, definitely. These are the things that we have to do. We also run, I know Hawke's Bay is the same as where I work here in Lower Hutt. They run a tracking system. Now, part of the standards is that we have to be able to track and trace our instruments. So that means from the patient into the decontamination, it's tracked.
How can it be then, Sheila, that it took a nurse to notice something was awry?
I do not know. I mean, it could be that it was work pressure. It could have been the time of the day. I don't know. But as a manager, I would be asking the question, why didn't you follow process and why didn't you check what you were doing?
What are you hearing from your peers and colleagues? What's the chat?
They're absolutely, from my peers and colleagues around the country, they're absolutely gobsmacked that it's happened. They're absolutely, they're shocked. And I think they're shocked for the technician and for the manager of the CSSD that they're having to deal with this and that, this has happened. Because if it does happen, it doesn't always come to the public attention. I think it's maybe hidden, but this is the first time it's really come out to the public attention. So we're all shocked that this has happened, and we really feel for the Hawke's Bay in this instance.
Are you telling me that you know of occasions where the process of sterilising surgical instruments or other hospital goods and supplies has been breached and not been reported?
I can't comment on that because I cannot confirm it because I don't have concrete evidence.
Is this one of the worst things that could happen at a hospital?
I believe it is. Well, from my perspective, it is, yes.
And it is 8 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keep your feedback coming. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. After an 11-week trial, the notorious Mexican drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman has been found guilty by a jury in New York of drug trafficking on a massive scale. Guzman's infamous Sinaloa cartel trafficked tons of cocaine, heroin, marijuana and methamphetamine into the US over more than 2 decades. He now faces a sentence of life in prison, although his lawyers are planning to appeal. The BBC's Nader Tawfiq has been following the weeks-long trial and has this report.
This raid by Mexican Marines was the beginning of the end of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's brutal reign as the world's most powerful drug lord. But it was the work of U.S. prosecutors who secured his extradition to New York and his conviction that sealed his fate. After a blockbuster trial that saw some of his closest associates testify against him, El Chapo was found guilty of 10 criminal charges, including drug trafficking, murder conspiracy, and money laundering.
El Chapo Guzman is the most infamous, the most feared, the wealthiest narco-trafficker in the world. And he directed tens of thousands of tons of high-grade cocaine, marijuana, methamphetamine, and heroin into the United States as well as into other parts of the world, to include Europe.
For months, this federal courthouse in New York became the set of a compelling drama, complete with a captivated audience and a colorful cast that included El Chapo's beauty queen wife, Emma Coronel. Prosecutors argued that El Chapo's many escapes proved his guilt. Jurors were shown video of Mexican Marines trying to ram the door of one of his secret hideouts. The drug lord was in bed with his mistress at the time, and together they escaped naked through a hydraulic hatch installed in a bathtub and down into a sewer tunnel. And when he was captured, it wasn't for long. The jury was shown one of his brazen escapes from prison in Mexico through a tunnel from the shower in his cell where a motorcycle waited to speed him off. The trial also heard some jaw-dropping allegations. One witness testified that the former Mexican president, Enrique Peña Nieto, accepted a $100 million bribe from El Chapo, a claim the politician has strongly denied. The trial allowed American prosecutors to detail the inner workings of the powerful Sinaloa cartel. Jurors were told that in just 4 drug shipments, El Chapo smuggled more than a line of cocaine for every person in the United States, using various decoys such as plastic bananas. The trial showed how El Chapo could be brutally violent and paranoid. He ordered the murder of his own cousin and was known to personally torture and kill his enemies. He also spied on his associates using sophisticated technology that authorities later tapped into, giving them valuable evidence of his crimes. There were many more shocking stories that jurors never heard. Unsealed court documents included a claim that El Chapo routinely drugged and raped girls as young as 13 years old, calling them his vitamins. Lawyers for El Chapo denied the allegations. Security has been a major feature of this trial, and now that prosecutors have won the conviction of the infamous drug lord, he is expected to spend the rest of his life in prison under heavy guard.
And that's Nader Tawfiq reporting from New York, and Guzman's lawyers are now planning to appeal the convictions. New Zealand's relationship with China has been front and centre in Parliament, with the Prime Minister admitting there are challenges with our major trading partner. The Chinese telecoms company Huawei has taken out full-page ads that read, "5G without Huawei is like rugby without New Zealand." The ads followed the GCSB's rejection of Huawei's bid to roll out Spark's 5G network, citing significant network security risks. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Throughout the week, there have been stories prompting questions about whether there has been a significant cooling of the relationship, including the Air New Zealand flight turned back from Shanghai and a postponed tourism event. Both were explained away by the Prime Minister as being because of technicalities and scheduling issues. But in the first question time of the year, National Simon Bridges wanted more answers.
Has New Zealand's relationship with China deteriorated under her government?
Mr. Speaker, no. There is no question that economic and people-to-people relationship with China is incredibly important to New Zealand. Visitor numbers in the last year are up 8.4%. There's also been an increase in goods exports.
Ms Ardern has received a formal invitation to visit China but has not yet secured a date. Mr Bridges asked her about other members of her executive.
Are 5 of her ministers currently seeking visits to China, and are they currently waiting for agreement from China to visit?
Mr Speaker, as is demonstrated by the number of ministers that have been, of course we have ongoing engagement, and that at any given time there will be a number of ministers working through their next visits.
The Prime Minister did make this concession.
Let us speak frankly in this House. There are challenges in our relationship. There are challenges in our relationship with a number of countries at any given time when you run an independent foreign policy.
But Ms Ardern hit back, accusing National of abandoning what she described as the convention for bipartisanship in the foreign affairs portfolio. And she gave this challenge to the opposition, including whether it would uphold the legislation governing the security of telecoms networks passed by the previous government.
My question to the opposition would be this. We stand by our decisions, particularly as it relates to the use of TICSA and the scrutiny of any telecommunications vendor in the national security interests of New Zealanders. Would the opposition do the same?
All of this is happening against the backdrop of New Zealand negotiating to upgrade its decade-old free trade deal with China. The Trade Minister David Parker intends to visit there again this year. He was there last in November. He says the relationship from a trade perspective is good, and he's seen no evidence of any roadblocks or stalling from China in regards to the upgrade, which he intends to progress further this year. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Time now quickly for some of your feedback on the story about the non-sterilisation of medical equipment. This person says, I'm a process specialist. This is nonsense about the fault being a systems error. Why didn't they check the process to avoid this obvious risk? The issue suggests that those who use the process don't actually know it. Another bit of advice from someone on that saying is, this is medical misadventure. I trust that the patients have been registered with ACC. They don't want to miss outside the registration period.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The risk of infection is believed to be low for people exposed to medical equipment that was not fully sterilised. Children and the elderly are among 55 patients in the Hawke's Bay who are now being tested for HIV and hepatitis after 91 pieces of surgical equipment were found to have not gone through the final stage of sterilisation. Half of the equipment was recalled before it was used. Dr Colin Hutchison of the Hawke's Bay District Health Board told Checkpoint the earlier stage of the sterilisation process is very thorough.
Yeah, it's impossible to put a statistical number on it, but the reason we have a multi-step process is for events such as this. And the 2 stages of cleaning that these instruments went through already, it's highly, highly likely to reduce any chance of passing on the viruses.
Colin Hutchison says patients can only get an infection if the equipment has been used on an infected person before the incomplete cleaning, which is unlikely. An Invercargill garage is the latest to be in trouble over warrants of fitness affecting 3,500 vehicle owners. The Transport Agency has revoked the inspecting authority of mechanic Donald McLean and that of his garage, the Waffman Limited. It says McLean failed to properly inspect brakes, exhaust systems and rust repairs and let others do inspections using his authority. The agency says it will be contacting 3,500 vehicle owners to advise them about the options for a recheck and will provide vouchers for that. Another 4 inspectors or garages around the country have had their ability to issue warrants revoked and 20 have been suspended. The Police Minister says the country's spy agency was not involved in a police investigation into incidents involving a prominent critic of China. Canterbury University professor Anne-Marie Brady has reported a number of incidents to the police since she published a paper on the influence of the Chinese Communist Party in the Pacific in 2017. These include a burglary at her home, 2 break-ins at her university office, damage to her car and anonymous phone calls. The police said today the investigation is unresolved and they have no further leads. The Minister of Police, Stuart Nash, says there is no indication that the Government Communications Security Bureau has been involved in the case. He says the police have done a thorough investigation.
They take any allegation from any member of the public seriously. They investigate it as they would anyone, and my understanding is they've done a full and proper job on this. But again, it is an operational matter. I'm not aware of the day-to-day goings-on of this.
Stuart Nash, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, says the Minister assured her last year that the police were dealing with the matter appropriately. The National Party leader claims 5 government ministers are seeking invites to China, but no visas have been issued. Simon Bridges bombarded the Prime Minister with questions about the government's relationship with its major trading partner in Parliament this afternoon. It follows a number of incidents this week, including an Air New Zealand flight being turned around and a joint tourism event here being postponed. Chinese telco Huawei also took out full-page ads in several newspapers today after the government rejected its bid to roll out Spark's 5G network. Mr Bridges says the relationship between the two nations is deteriorating, and he put that to Jacinda Ardern.
Is the Prime Minister in that answer tacitly acknowledging that her ministers aren't getting visits to China anymore?
No, Mr Speaker, I am calling out the plain politics of our relationships.
Simon Bridges and Jacinda Ardern at question time in Parliament this afternoon. Industry training organisations warn the government is planning to dismantle the system of work-based training which they oversee. The government has proposed transferring responsibility for work-based training and apprenticeships to Polytechnics, which will be merged into a single new institution. The Industry Training Federation says on-the-job training is working well and costs a lot less than the training provided by tertiary institutions. It says the ITOs have been swept up in an attempt to fix problems within the polytechnic sector. The Union for Polytechnic Staff says the plan will end wasteful competition between institutions. The Reserve Bank is the Reserve Bank is keeping the official cash rate on hold at 1.75% and expects to do so throughout this year and next. However, the Governor, Adrian Orr, is bringing back a note of caution, making mention of slowing economic growth in China and Australia, which could affect New Zealand. Mr Orr says while the risks exist, they're just concerns to keep an eye on for the time being.
We still see the outlook as balanced to up and down. What we are saying is that it may stay at this level for longer based on our current projections, in large part because of that slowing global economic activity.
The Reserve Bank Governor, Adrian Orr. It's nearly 6 minutes past 6. On to sport now. The Black Caps have been set 233 to win the opening one-day cricket international against Bangladesh in Napier. After winning the toss and opting to bat, the tourists slumped to 94 for 6. But the Black Caps were unable to mop up the lower order, with Mohammed Mitten making 62 and Mohammed Saifuddin 41, putting on 86 for the 8th wicket and helping the tourists to a defendable total. Bowling for the Black Caps, Trent Boult and Mitch Satner took 3 wickets each, while Matt Henry and Lockie Ferguson took 2 apiece. The Chiefs have surprisingly named former Blues midfielder Auburn Ledger at first 5 for their Super Rugby opener against the Highlanders in Hamilton on Friday. Ledger, who wasn't named in the initial Chiefs squad, will play out of position in place of injured All Black Damien McKenzie. Head coach Colin Cooper has named 4 newcomers in the matchday squad, including Ledger, All Black Sevens player Eteni Nanai Saturo and Auckland centre Tumua Manu in the starting lineup, while the Tongan-born Japan international winger Atata Moekiola is in the reserves. Meanwhile, All Blacks fullback Ben Smith will start for the Highlanders, with fellow All Blacks Aaron Smith and Wasaki Naholo on the bench. The governing body for chess wants the game to be included in the 2024 Paris Olympics. The International Chess Federation wants faster formats of traditional chess called Rapid and Blitz to be included, saying 600 million people play the game globally. The IOC recognised chess as a sport in 1999. It was an exhibition sport at Sydney in 2000. That's the news.
The Salvation Army warns of dodgy loans.
One of the concerns we have is just our willingness as a nation to keep on borrowing to fund our obsession with housing.
El Chapo pays his debt to society.
El Chapo is responsible for smuggling of massive amounts of narcotics into the United States. This conviction, we expect, will bring a sentence of life.
And Huawei goes on the offensive over 5G.
It will have to get used to the cut and thrust of international politics.
Always on guard. Morning Report with Guy and Aspinall and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, forensic toxicologist Diana Kapatos on efforts to determine what's in synthetic drugs. And after 10, from rubbish dump to city asset and attraction, Peter Sergel, who masterminded Hamilton Gardens. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now we have the short forecast through to midnight tomorrow, Thursday, from our Met Service. In the west, from Auckland to Wellington, fine apart from areas of cloud morning and night. For the rest of the North Island, also Nelson, mostly sunny. Bulla and Westland, fine for the rest of today. Drizzle develops tomorrow morning, then rain spreading northwards from tomorrow afternoon. Heavy in southern Westland. Fiordland, often cloudy with a few showers in the west. Rain with heavy falls for a time overnight through to tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough and Canterbury mainly fine. Low cloud about the coast at times. High cloud increasing tomorrow, then late showers for Canterbury. Otago and Southland fine with increasing high cloud today. Low cloud about the east coast at times. A period of rain, morning or afternoon, followed by isolated showers. The Chatham Islands, low cloud, occasional drizzle, clearing. It's 9 minutes past 6.
You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Up to 55 people are being tested for blood-borne viruses, including hepatitis B, C and HIV, after they were potentially exposed to inadequately cleaned surgical instruments. The tools were used on patients at Hawke's Bay Hospital in Hastings, along with other clinics across the district. 3 children under the age of 16 and 4 people over 70 are among those at risk. Anusha Bradley reports.
On Monday, a theatre nurse discovered a pack of surgical tools that hadn't been properly sterilised. The instruments belonged to a batch containing 91 pieces, which had failed to go through the final step of sterilisation on the night of February 1st and 2nd. Up to 55 people may have been affected by the mistake, including 18 who were operated on at Hawke's Bay Hospital in Hastings. The rest of the equipment was sent out to clinics across the district for dental and gynaecological purposes. Chief Executive of Hawke's Bay DHB, Kevin Snee, says the risk posed to patients is very low.
While this batch of equipment was properly cleaned, heated to a very high temperature and dried, the final sterilisation process was not completed as it should have been. This means there is a very remote chance those patients may have been exposed to an infection. We're reassured from the advice that we have received from clinical experts, both locally and nationally, that any risk of infection is extremely remote.
Surgical tools used in the main hospital can be tracked back to individual patients, but the DHB says this isn't done in outpatient clinics. Patients potentially exposed to infection are being tested for blood-borne viruses, including HIV, hepatitis B and hepatitis C. The DHB's Executive Director of Provider Services, Dr Colin Hutchinson, says patients will have to wait for 24 weeks to be given the all clear.
The community of patients that we're reaching out to are very understanding and they're very grateful for us reaching out to them in an open and transparent way. And the event review will help us understand why this has occurred. In the meantime, we are managing the patients and our staff to ensure that the patients understand what's occurred and what the care plan is for them. And we're also walking through with our staff, not only to help them cope with the situation, but to ensure immediately that this can't happen again.
The DHB is currently advertising for a part-time sterile services assistant, but Dr Hutchinson says staff shortages are not to blame for this incident.
So we constantly have a number of jobs being advertised, and this wasn't down to a shortage of staff.
Affected patients will be offered a vaccine for hepatitis B, and the DHB says compensation may be considered. Health Minister David Clark admits people may be feeling anxious.
And of course my sympathies are with those people who are facing anxiety and not knowing. It's a small-ish number, but this kind of thing shouldn't happen. But I'm pleased that the DHB itself has taken responsibility for what's happened and are determined to follow up with a proper investigation.
The DHB says that investigation could take a few weeks to complete. In Hastings for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
The chair of Hawke's Bay DHB is Kevin Atkinson, and he's on the phone now. Kevin, how many patients are still in the dark about the fact that they are, involved in this blunder?
The last update I had at lunchtime, I've been tied up with other business during the afternoon, but around about 4, I think, we're still to make contact with.
And why haven't they been reached?
Because they're not answering the phones or that they gave us for getting in touch with them. So one can only assume that they're out of town, probably.
Okay, so you heard about this situation in a call on Monday evening. How did that conversation go?
I'd have to say I was shocked and extremely disappointed, and I do have a great deal of sympathy for those patients that have been affected. And from the board's perspective, these patients should feel that we're offering them a safe environment in which to have their procedures done. And so, we've let those patients down quite significantly, and I can only apologise for that.
So what instructions have you given to your Chief Executive, Kevin Snee, Dr Kevin Snee?
Well, First of all, I've been reassured by management, who've also used advice from the EFR, that the risk of infection is extremely remote. However, we've got to understand how this incident has occurred because, the processes used in Hawke's Bay are quite similar to those around the country. Those processes are subject to audit and
but they seem to have
on a
failed.
regular basis, and the board should have confidence that the systems don't allow the situation to exist. So,
but clearly they do, because this system already, it's been identified, has failed at multiple steps. Didn't get the third stage of sterilisation. You can't track the equipment in your out clinics, and also clearly 55 times potentially equipment was used, and the final check on the stickers wasn't done. Otherwise, someone would have picked it up.
Absolutely agree with you, and the board have now instructed management to undergo a full and transparent investigation. That's obviously going to include some independent expert resource as well, and we hope to see a first report on those findings and the lessons learned sometime within the next week or two.
Okay, so is there any issue with funding here, or do you think it's just incompetence?
I don't believe there's any issue. No, there's no issue with funding. The board would never compromise patient safety, no matter what position we're in financially. So, no, certainly funding isn't an issue, and I don't think staff numbers are also an issue.
So competency is the issue.
It appears on the surface to us, or to me at the moment, that this is just the system hasn't been followed for some reason.
So how are you going to hold your chief executive to account over this?
Well, we really need to sort of understand really what has actually caused the incident. But I know, Dr. Snee is upset as I am over the incident, and as I have, we expect these processes that do have external audit, etc., are robust, and we hope that our staff follow those without exception.
Thank you for joining us this evening. That is the Hawke's Bay DHB Chair of the Board, Kevin Atkinson, and that is about the failure in sterilising medical equipment. Refugees and asylum seekers that need urgent medical help in Nauru and Manus Island will have an easier passage to Australia for treatment after a new law was passed today. The government was defeated on the floor of Parliament for the first time in 90 years, 3 months away from the federal election. Alex Perrottet has the story.
In Australia, there's 2 houses of Parliament, so 2 votes. This was last night in the lower house.
Order. The result of the division is ayes 75, noes 74. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative.
And today in the Senate.
The result of the division is ayes 36, noes 34. The matter is resolved in the affirmative. There's no need for applause. It's out of order. Now,
Senate President Scott Ryan not exactly celebrating the government being defeated in both houses, the first time since 1929. For years, doctors have called for asylum seekers and refugees on Nauru and Manus Island to have better access to medical treatment. 6,000 Australian doctors signed a petition joining the United Nations and other groups calling for all children to be removed from Nauru, something the government said it had achieved by the end of 2018. Now, around 1,000 others could be eligible to travel to Australia for treatment. John Edwards from Doctors Without Borders says its doctors were busy in Nauru helping a huge number of adults with mental health problems, but the Nauru government expelled them last year. He says they can now breathe a momentary sigh of relief.
Even if it does not, of course, address the key issue, which is that the policy of indefinite detention, long-term indefinite containment, let's say, on Nauru and Manus, is what is causing at least the mental health crisis for our patients.
The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, responded to the defeat, saying refugees and asylum seekers in Nauru and Manus Island have plenty of help.
There are more than 60 medical professionals on Nauru for 420 people. If that says there is no medical facilities available on Nauru, then that is ridiculous. Tell me another part of this country that has one medical professional for every 7 people.
But John Edwards says Nauru's medical system is not nearly as rosy as the Prime Minister describes it.
Very, very limited facilities available on Nauru. Psychiatry, almost zero. No inpatient facilities for mental health. So the services simply aren't available in the way they need to be to meet the very significant needs.
Scott Morrison, a former Immigration and Border Protection Minister, credited with stopping the boats, announced today he will reopen the Christmas Island Detention Centre, another controversial offshore site the government had quietly closed last year. He says if the number of boat arrivals now increases, that's the fault of Labour leader Bill Shorten and those who voted for the legislation. Jana Favero from the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre says that's a distraction in an election year.
We just need to call it out for the lies that is. Over 800 people are already in Australia for medical treatment. Over 500 people went to the US. The boats didn't start. This is only applicable, this bill, to the people who are currently on Manus and Nauru. So the announcement of Christmas Island, it just needs to be seen for what it is. It's scare tactics. It's a desperate government trying to put fear before people's lives.
But senior coalition MPs are maintaining the argument, saying Australia's alternative Prime Minister Bill Shorten is being completely reckless. Political pundits in Australia say while the coalition has been defeated, the ensuing debate on border protection may actually help the government, which is polling badly ahead of the election in May. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
The Salvation Army's 2019 State of the Nation report is calling on the government to do more to close the gaps of social inequality across the country. But how do people feel their communities are faring under the Labour-led government as it prepares to roll out its wellbeing budget this year? Te Manu Kōrahi reporter John Boynton went to the West Auckland suburb of Kelston to find out.
As construction noise floods the Kelston shopping mall, Cheryl Ball rolls out with her trolley full of kai for her whānau. And at the moment, she says her whānau are all living under one roof.
There's me, my husband, my mum, there's my son, there's my husband's sister, there's my daughter, and she's got 3 kids, and one of them's got a partner, and then I've got my other grandson.
And Miss Ball says other families around Kelston are being forced to do the same.
If you go and look around everywhere, you'll see a lot of people now have got portacoms on their places because they're taking their families all back in. That's what we had to do. We went and got portacoms so that our kids have somewhere to live. And that's it's a rent thing. How many people can pay $550 when they only get some of the money earn that much?
The Salvation Army State of the Nation report out today shows demand for public and other social housing has more than doubled in the last 2 years. It also highlights a lack of progress in key areas, including record levels of household debt and a growing gap in educational achievement between poorer and more well-off communities. And 80,000 young people aren't in employment, education or training. This is despite a decrease in the unemployment rate. In Kelston, a working-class suburb in West Auckland, locals are living through many of the issues highlighted in the report.
There's more and more crime, more and more stabbing, stealing from shops. I think we're going backwards.
It's just been a gradual increase over the years with people needing assistance with food parcels, general help, problems with finding homes and rent.
I've been on the Housing New Zealand waiting list for 2 years. And I'm still waiting. And I'm in a bad situation. I'm sleeping on couches at everyone's houses, just going house to house. So yeah, I haven't seen any change yet.
However, Ingrid Chapman says she's seen a positive shift since Labour came into government.
I mean, you just have to look around our area. There's buildings going up everywhere. We've gone from nothing at all happening to housing everywhere. So it's got to be a difference, doesn't it? I don't know, everyone I spoke to seems to be a lot happier. You know, they've made a lot of changes with the benefits and stuff like that, and it's working out for most people, I know.
But Lee Sutton believes the Labour-led government has crippled the rockstar economy built by the previous National Party government.
And now they're doing their best to drive it into the ground. You know, the simple reality of it is you can't be a socialist and go the answer to every financial problem is just to print more money.
The government announced today the date for its next budget under what it calls its wellbeing approach, Thursday, May 30th. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton a home.
One of the country's leading QCs says a DHB request for a new coroner's investigation into the death of Nikki Stevens is highly unusual and driven by money. A coroner's decision last year ruled that the 21-year-old's death was a preventable suicide after he walked out of the Waikato Hospital's mental health unit and was found dead 3 days later. The Waikato DHB has now requested the Solicitor General open a new inquiry, a decision that has left Nikki's parents reeling. Mediana Johnson with this report.
Jane Stevens and Dave McPherson thought that the almost 4-year nightmare following the death of their son was almost over. But just when they thought Waikato DHB was negotiating in good faith and they were about to receive an apology, the DHB pulled the rug out from underneath them, Nikki Stevens' father says.
We were dumbstruck when we heard yesterday. We had no inkling that that's what they were planning. They, in fact, said something quite different to us. We thought they had some minor procedural complaints, not that they were trying to get a whole new hearing. We waited 3.5 years for the last one.
The first inquiry has taken a toll on the family. With no legal support on offer to them, they were forced to cut down hours at work and drop hobbies to dedicate more time to the hearings.
Yeah, at the same time, we're looking every day at photos of our dead son, knowing that his death was preventable.
Nikki's mother, Jane, struggled to put into words what it would be like to go through yet another coroner's inquiry.
I just can't imagine going through that whole process again. It's traumatising for families, having to do it once, but, if there's going to be a further inquiry, I'm just shaking my head. Sorry.
The Waikato DHB said in a statement that it responded to the coroner's draft report last year with a considerable number of procedural concerns, which it said were not all acknowledged in the final report. It went on to say, "Our insurer has instructed the DHB's external counsel to raise concerns about the coroner's process with the Solicitor General with our support." The DHB's decision has come as a surprise to QC Nigel Hampton.
I've had a lot of experience over the years in coronial inquiries, and I have never seen the like of this. It's extraordinary in that sense.
The Coroner's Act says that an inquiry can be reopened because of fraud, rejection of evidence, irregularity of proceedings, or discovery of new facts, or for any other sufficient reason. Nigel Hampton says the DHB appear to be applying on the grounds of irregularity of proceedings, which he was surprised about, given the experience of the coroner, Wallace Bain. He's particularly concerned that the request has come from the DHB's insurer.
If it was interests of justice being the driver, I might well have a different view, but it doesn't seem to be. It is financial considerations which are the driver.
The Solicitor General's office says the overriding consideration when deciding a new inquiry is whether it is necessary or desirable in the interests of justice. The family say they no longer trust the DHB to act in good faith and have asked the Prime Minister to install an independent mediator. Crown Law could not say when a decision would be made, as it had not yet received the relevant files, but it could be some months. For Checkpoint, ko Mediana Johnson, TNA.
A spat broke out between National and Labour MPs at Parliament today, which led to a number of Select Committee hearings being cancelled. The Finance and Expenditure Committee was short one Labour MP after Tamati Coffey called in sick. Labour tried to scramble to get cover, but the replacement arrived 30 seconds too late. And National's MPs refused to come back into the committee room to make up a quorum. The mess left many submitters annoyed and frustrated, particularly those who had flown to Wellington for the hearings. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The chair of the committee, Labour's Michael Wood, says National could have made up the numbers but refused, which he says was just petty point scoring.
Well, it's incredibly disappointing because today we had about 15 submitters who had flown in from all around the country to submit on the budget policy statement, which is the first step of the budget cycle for this year, to give their say on what the government's priorities should be. So their time has been completely wasted.
But National's David Carter says government MPs should turn up on time, and he makes no apology for collapsing the quorum.
We're not there to do the government's job. It's their job to maintain quorums around select committees. Their people were late. When they schedule meetings for 8 o'clock, it's imperative that Labour members of Parliament get out of bed and get to their select committees on time.
Nationals leader Simon Bridges says he backs his MPs' actions.
Because I think what it shows is a government and government MPs that don't take the business of government seriously. Select committees is a core part of our role as members of Parliament. This wasn't just one, this was a number of government MPs who didn't think it was important enough to be there, to get out of bed and turn up to the Select Committee.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says she's made it clear she expects MPs to turn up when they're supposed to.
Absolutely have an expectation that MPs fulfil their roles and requirements while they're in this complex.
Professor Nick Wilson from Otago University turned up at the committee having put a lot of work into a group submission. He's not impressed with what he calls nitpicking behaviour by some MPs.
Given the waste of time it causes, it just seems really reckless behaviour on the part of some politicians.
Nick Wilson says a functioning democracy has to have give and take between parties, and in some areas they're doing well.
There's cross-party support for action on climate change and so on, but this is really going backwards. If we're going to sort of move to the American model where there's sort of hyper-partisan views and there's no cross-party goodwill and collaboration, this is quite dysfunctional.
Professor Wilson's colleague Richard Edwards says it will now be a matter of finding another time that submitters can all get along to another hearing, which is an inconvenience.
It just slows everything down. And if it was a very minor issue, a procedural type issue, it seems a rather stupid procedure, and the Parliament seems to be happy to inconvenience a lot of people who give their time to come and participate in the process over what potentially were fairly minor issues.
The hearings will now have to be rescheduled. Atu i te whare pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
And just enough time for a bit of feedback before we go on this plan to revamp New Zealand's polytechnics. Gail says, up to the era of Rogernomics in the 1980s, employers trained their own staff to make coffee, cut hair. Even nurses were trained by the hospitals on the job, plus tutorials. Now young people have to take out loans, Gail says, to learn jobs that employers should be footing the bill for. And she says trades such as building and electrical need to be stepped up. Years of neglect under the national government, says Gail, have left poor forward planning and a scarcity of trained tradies. Let's hope reorganising the Polytechs brings some action on this front. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Hawke's Bay DHB has assured 55 patients who may have been treated using incompletely sterilised equipment that the risk of infection is very low. Polytechnics are cautiously welcoming the government's merger plans, but ITOs are unhappy about losing responsibility for on-the-job training. The lawyer for a Northland police officer accused of sexual assault says the activity was consensual and the woman invited him to her house. And the Reserve Bank expects the official cash rate to remain at 1.75% for the next 2 years, but notes slowing economic growth overseas. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather will be at 7.
If you think RNZ has breached formal standards either on air or in our online content, you have the right to make a formal complaint. This must be made in writing to the broadcaster first within 20 working days.